So we're back. Okay, hot potato time.
Should we introduce the guests again, David?
Oh, okay. That sounds good. Okay. Co-hosts, Gene Hislop, David Stevenson. Guests, Mark Albertson and John Kusumi. And the first lightning round question is Egypt. John, take us through Egypt. What's going on in Egypt? And then let's talk about Egypt for a while.
Well, Egypt obviously has had the departure of Mubarak, but it has not yet had certain things like new constitution, new elections, and in fact, the news told us that the army was dissolving the parliament and suspending the constitution, and those are taken to be positive, steps in the right direction. That was like two of the demands of the protesters. But I did not hear them say they are releasing all political prisoners. Okay? Now that is the difference, really. When freedom comes, you release the prisoners of conscience.
Absolutely.
All right? And so, I realize it's now 4 days after the departure of Mubarak. And, maybe even by the time that this airs, the show, the news will tell us something else. But the release of political prisoners is like the thing that I'm looking for to tell me that there's, real or legitimate or true change that's coming to Egypt. And it remains to be seen. And so at this point, it's good to be cautiously optimistic and a bit skeptical.
I would like to rewind for the viewers who are tuning into this episode who did not catch our last episode with our esteemed guests. We were talking about revolution. There are currently at least 4 countries that are really experiencing a high level of revolution. And the point had been brought up in the last episode about how revolutions at certain periods in history were bloodbaths and others were more peaceful, such as the movement of Gandhi and the peace movement for independence in India, and how that differed from some of the other revolutions. And really, actually, Egypt experienced a relatively low level of violence. I would like to address the fact that social media is so huge these days, and even beyond the social media, such as Facebook and Twister.
Hey! Where's the dots in the tablecloth?
Such as Facebook and Twitter, we also have such an incredible, 24/7 news culture, media culture. How much do you think, even since you are an expert on China's revolution, even since Tiananmen Square, how much has the explosion of our 24/7 news and our social media actually affected the level of violence, do you believe, that happens in these revolutions?
That's difficult to say because you've brought overlapping concerns into that question. CNN itself, has been around since, was it 1980?
About, yeah.
And so it wasn't new at the time of Tiananmen Square. Tiananmen provided, something that they were able to present a lot of coverage of. But there's been an information explosion ongoing, especially with the arrival of small computers. And so, again, start in the early 80s and continue forwards. It's with us. The information explosion has only intensified as, the web has expanded. So we have that. My take on it is that, the information technology is a leveling factor. It levels the playing field. It means suddenly, people of modest means can have their voices heard, and that's just what just happened in Egypt. So that it may become quaint, really, to look back at governments with the haughty, arrogant, the attitude. What's true in today's world is that governments can no longer pretend or act as if their people don't exist. All right, the people do exist, and there's pushback that is happening right now on the streets of the Arab world. And so, there's just a bit of the bubble, perhaps, or the detachment, the plutocratic sort of angle that's been taken by politicos, particularly in the United States. But I think that there's a leveling factor here as information technology just makes it possible for alternative perspectives to be heard.
As an expert in China's ongoing move for democracy, how do people who are concerned about helping China, the common man in China, how do people become involved with that movement?
Well, there's innumerable ways. My organization is the China Support Network, and everyone would always be welcome to visit us. We're at www.chinasupport.net.
Okay.
There's innumerable groups related to this cause and to adjacent causes. There's such a thing as Students for a Free Tibet.
Yes.
And there's a myriad of Tibetan-related groups. You can find them, and you can find the information. You can follow what is effectively a news beat, and it's true. There is a news beat that goes uncovered in our mainstream press.
Absolutely.
Because there's a community of the Chinese dissidents. It's a community that has its established figures. There's a totem pole. We know who is Wei Jingshan, who is Xu Wenli, and the people who led Tiananmen Square. Likewise, the Tibetan campaign is its own community with its own figures. And, if this show is now airing, what is it, Wednesday or Thursday? It was just on Monday of this week, the Dalai Lama's nephew was killed. He was walking along a highway in Florida and just hit by an SUV. Now, he was on a walk to raise awareness for the Tibetan cause. All right.
So conspiracy or
I wouldn't think of it as a communist conspiracy. I think that it was an American person driving an SUV, and there you are on Highway A1A in Florida. But so now the cause has lost a significant figure.
Right.
All right. The nephew of the Dalai Lama. And I guess I began by saying this. There is a news beat, that is happening because there is this cause and there's the Chinese dissident community, and it's entirely not covered by the mainstream press in the United States. It's ridiculous, and that's why my organization exists. So come on over to the China Support Network, and we'll try to fill you in on some of those details.
Now, it's interesting that you mentioned that because obviously with what is happening in the Middle East, all the massive things that are happening in the Middle East, Al Jazeera, Al Jazeera's U.S. and English, versions have become very well noticed and known. People know they can go to Al Jazeera and get more information than what they're getting in the American press. Is there an equivalent besides going to an organization within the Chinese movement for?
Well, yes. If I had to think about, alternative news sources, Al Jazeera is sort of an Arabic channel. Press TV is Iranian, which means it's the Iranian regime. There's Russia Today, RT, and RT America, which actually I enjoy their coverage. But for more alternatives, I don't know. I mean, you can take a look on YouTube. You can find just about every point of view represented. And in the case of the Chinese cause, there is such a thing. It's called New Tang Dynasty Television.
Okay.
And so that's a television network that was put together by Falun Gong practitioners.
And they have English?
And there's an English side to it, and they've been able to transmit by satellite. They used to reach more people inside China, and then their satellite provider cut them off. And there's an issue. There's a company called Eutelsat, which is, I think, in France. And under political pressure from the Chinese regime, they discontinued the signal of this NTD TV. But the channel exists. And so you can find programming happening there just as you can at RT or at Al Jazeera or wherever else has been mentioned. So yeah, the sources are there. You can find alternative news, and when you know where to look for it, it's right there on the web, and I take it in regularly. So it's sort of I think that more and more people are doing that too, because eventually it's time to just sort of tune out or turn off Brian Williams and
right here in Danbury. A good friend of the show, Al Robinson, has Het City Blog, and again an alternative media to a failing Danbury News Times that doesn't have the ability, the staff, to cover local issues anymore.
At least objectively.
At least, exactly. At least, yeah. They're a little more little less subjective. A little more subjective than they objective. Thank you for the correction on that. And so we have alternative media here in Danbury and probably all over the United States. And I'm seeing, what I'm hearing is that we're getting this all over the world. The ability of individuals and small groups to speak power to their message and get it out there and give people the opportunity to listen and look at it objectively and critique it and take from it that which they believe is correct according to the facts they're hearing elsewhere. And
now, I would like to actually pose this question to both of you. I know that John and I spoke off camera about this issue, and I'd like to also to get Mark's take on this. With all of these revolutions happening globally, and with the massive discontent that there seems to be in America at this time, certainly we've been on the brink of supposed civil war and revolution in the past. I mean, if you look at the 60s, it looked like everything was falling apart. But I think the difference might be economics in this situation. People are getting very, very scared of the economic collapse that we're in. And then we have social issues on top of that. How close would you project, and do you project, that America is going to have its own civil war, revolution, people's uprising? Do you think that that's on its way?
I think that we're going in that direction, but that before we get there, that we are going to experience the collapse of the U.S. dollar. That's almost an inevitable consequence of the unsustainable economics and the unsustainable fiscal policies that have been followed for 40, 50 years.
Certainly since the beginning of Ronald Reagan, when the debt started to really skyrocket.
Well, and there are those who would trace things back to 1913 when the Federal Reserve was established.
Woodrow Wilson.
The Federal Reserve, which has gotten good, or as you might think, bad press coverage on our show. We've had some discussions about the Federal Reserve and things that they do that are seemingly contrary to the best will of the best intent of the American people.
Going back to what you were saying about communications today and the ability to get information out there, it's interesting, as you mentioned before, you've had this explosion of avenues of obtaining information and getting information out in the last 25 years. Yet the American public is dumber than it was 25 years ago. They are. They're dumb.
Interesting observation. Yeah,
they are.
In terms of tangible facts.
I talked to a couple of graduates of one of my local high schools a few years ago, who told me the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki came before the attack on Pearl Harbor. I mean, I talked to a black kid who graduated high school. My son didn't know who Rosa Parks was. Took a honky to tell him that.
The histories of lessons, lessons of history are easily forgotten.
Yeah,
right.
and look at the wars today. Americans seem to be disconnected from Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah.
There are a number of reasons for this. Number one, this isn't 1941 when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor.
Yep.
Everyone was in it's a world war, we're into this. You were made to feel part of the war effort. Your gasoline was rationed, your meat was rationed, your sugar, so on and so forth. Does that happen today?
The concept of shared sacrifice, in other words.
Well, correct. But the thing is, if you're going to be in a long war, you cut back on the civilian side of the economy and gear it to the war economy. You don't run deficits quite that much that way. It's war planning. But they don't want you to feel part of this war, which means there's an agenda. I mean, why do you think Bush kept all those caskets coming back under wraps? Obama took it off, took the restrictions off. Well, when you only got one or two coming back, oh, that's not a big deal.
Yeah.
Especially when these soldiers are dying in places these people here can't even pronounce the names of. I think it's great, and I think that's a lot of what is responsible for what's going on in the Middle East. But I think one thing we haven't mentioned is WikiLeaks. Mm-hmm. WikiLeaks is getting to be the new journalism, and I think they're in a way doing what our newspapers should have been doing.
Yeah.
Of course, when it's corporate controlled, going back to what you were saying about the 60s, when you have 40 or 50 different organizations or people owning your media, it's not a closed club. You have six owners of the popular media in this country, and they're all corporate. Mm-hmm. So you're going to get a controlled news. That's why it took a long time for Tunisia to get into the papers. I mean, it was almost a month before the Washington Post even covered it. Why? Because it's a worker revolution, and being a corporate-controlled media, that's not popular. Workers aren't popular in this country anymore. Unions aren't popular here anymore.
Organized workers,
so why would you want to perpetuate that type of revolt in your media?
You wouldn't want to instill that thought in the minds of
exactly the point I'm trying to make here. Exactly the point I'm trying to make. So yeah, while I think it's a great thing, I think it's like you were saying. It's another tool. You didn't have iPods and internet when the Chinese revolted. Mm-hmm. Yet it got popular. So is it valuable? Yes. Is there a chance of a revolt here? Yeah, eventually. I do agree with what John said about the collapse of the dollar, but I don't think the American public is ready for that yet. I think the American public is in a state of denial. When you see, I think the American public going more toward third and fourth and fifth party candidates, then you're going to say, yeah, something's up here. But as long as they keep voting for Democrats and Republicans on a national level, we're spinning our wheels here. We're going no place.
And the parties have come to, as we've talked about on many shows, the parties have come to reflect each other more than we'd like.
Well, they're bought and sold already. That's the thing. They're bought and sold already.
A lot of corporate Democrats to go along with it, and essentially an entirely corporate Republican Party.
Well, just before this present Congress took office, if you went back and Republicans catered to the rich, really? Well, 7 of the top 10 the Congress people or senators, and yet 20 of the top 50 were Democrats.
Yeah,
the richest.
But that actually reinforces my question. I think people are beginning and very much beginning to realize that the corporate sellout of our government is what is to blame here. And not only the collapse of the American dollar, but that feeling of betrayal and being sold out is what is angering the American public. So how much of that will people bear? Maybe less than we think. Maybe it won't take the collapse of the total collapse, because we've already pretty much collapsed, but the total collapse of the American dollar, maybe that sense of complete betrayal from our government would be the thing to push us over the edge. Because in Egypt, it wasn't certainly limited to their economic problems. It was having a regime in for 20 years, that would not allow them to vote.
In a state of emergency for 30 years.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Right. Well, I think part of the problem is, let's go back here. We can blame Obama, we can blame Bush, we can blame Clinton. There's a lot of blame to go around. But, actually, we as a people look in the mirror. Now we know who's responsible. So you have to come to that reality first here. But and going back to what you were saying before about Egypt, how the people more or less, it was, sure, they took to the streets, they were waving their fists, so on and so forth. But a revolution in this country, as gunned up as it is, oh boy!
Are there more guns?
I don't.
Well, it is frightening because most of the guns are in the hands of the Republicans. So if we do,
I know a lot of Democrats who like to shoot. I used to be a gunner myself. But I love to shoot.
But the majority of gun holders in America are currently Republicans or Libertarians.
Well, you might have to fact check that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think you would. It used to be in this country where there were twice as many guns down south as there were up north. Yet there were twice as many murders up north as there was down south. So it's not just a gun.
Right.
Who lives where?
Right.
So that's a double-edged sword too.
Yeah.
If I could, though, I'd like to sort of suggest my own question here.
Okay.
Because Egypt has just had the departure of Hosni Mubarak, and seemingly the world is at their feet, or there's great opportunity. They can remake their nation. And what advice would I give to the people of Egypt right now? Because there's essentially two there that I think are very key pieces of advice. One is, don't take any loans from the IMF.
No.
No. Which South America has caught on to finally.
Right. And two is to insist that your government must own and operate its own central bank.
Absolutely.
Aha. As I believe the Chinese float their own currency, don't they? And that's part of what's made China very strong financially.
Yeah. Well, I'm aware of the plight of Western civilization, and we've seen unrest in Europe. All right, we don't need to just be thinking of the Arab world.
No, Greece.
We've seen Greece explode. We've seen London explode.
Even Ireland.
We've seen Ireland explode. We've seen Iceland explode. And if it's not yet there for Spain, Portugal, and Italy, they're next.
Oh, they're getting there.
All right. So the thing is that all of these countries have it in common that they've been working with this same international banking cartel, that basically owns the Federal Reserve. And the major other institutions, there's a private ownership of wealth, that has occurred, and it was institutionalized when they created the Federal Reserve. But the Federal Reserve is really not federal; it's privately owned.
Correct.
And so, as long as you have a privately owned, that's our central bank,
right?
And the Constitution specifies that it is a function of the government to coin money.
Right.
So
exactly.
Why are we outsourcing that particular task? We're delegating it to the Fed.
Yeah.
It could be done in-house in the government, and therefore not pay interest to the banksters.
Absolutely.
And all of Europe is having the same problem. They're now, every nation that's in the euro currency, it's more or less the same boat. In other words, even if the government turns over in Greece, in Ireland, in Spain, in Portugal, it doesn't change anything unless they're going to get out of the euro. If they're going to step back and then once again print their own local currency, that's the ultimate solution. In other words, in Ireland now, you can find people who advocate, let's get out of the euro, let's bring back the pound.
Oh, my cousin's one of them. Yes, very much. He is very disgusted.
And so, I think that they're not going to find their way to prosperity or to economic health unless or until they take care of that, because it is genuinely unsustainable to simply borrow all of your government's operating budget from banksters. As all the deficit spending has continued, the interest payments to the banksters become larger and larger.
Right.
And so Egypt has an opportunity to say, hey, as long as we're reforming things, let's make sure we have our own central government or central bank, and perhaps require that in the Constitution. It's the same advice that I give to the Chinese dissidents. If and when there's turnover of the government in China, make sure that you own and operate your own central bank.
Central bank.
Interesting to note that the choice of the word banksters, which of course sounds just enough like gangsters.
Yes.
Right.
That it's a
Right.
point well made, and I imagine point well taken.
Well, I thought that Progressive Soup is the show where it's sort of a friendly environment around here. So I'm
Absolutely, I think it's a good term. I think
I'd leave to
it fits the
bankster. Yeah.
it fits. Yeah.
Well, I think one thing with Europe is that unlike Americans, Europeans have more of a progressive nature to them. There's more socialists. The Communist Party was big at one point in France and Italy.
Yep.
So I think that helps perpetuate that. It's not quite the so-called rugged individualism of Americans. So I think you're not going to see, although they were taken to they're going to be taken to the streets in Wisconsin and what's going on there. But I don't think you're seeing that here in America yet. Will you see it? Yeah, quite possibly. You could see it. But I don't think we're there yet. I still think there are people in this country that are still too comfortable with what's going on. And until they break that cycle of voting for Democrats and Republicans on a national level, when you see them starting to vote for third, fourth, fifth party candidates, or insist on having third and fourth, fifth party candidates.
Green Party. We've had the three marvelous groups on our show over the 2 years. Green Party members, Libertarians, and Working Families Party members that are all excellent parties.
Well, I must say that one of the differences, I mean, I really don't know the demographic of the Egyptian revolution, but I know that certainly the Iranian revolution and the Chinese revolution had a lot of young, an influx of young people in their movements. And in America, it seems like our youth are particularly apathetic. I think social media is beginning to change that, but for so long we have just stuck our kids in front of video games and iPods and everything else that they really have not been exposed to these looming questions about our economy and our politics and imperialism and all of those burning issues within our government. How much has Egypt's revolution actually differed from Chinese revolution so far in that, as far as you know?
Well, I mean, what Egypt has is something that the Chinese dissidents can envy, namely the success of driving out their dictator.
That's true.
I mean, that's the one difference, and the other difference is that at Tiananmen Square it ended with a bloodbath, while in Tahrir Square, I mean, sure there was conflict, but it was not the army opening fire on the civilians.
Anderson Cooper got beat up, though.
Yeah. Well, no, but I mean, at least the army would not open fire.
His 10-year-old brother beat him up too. So what's the big deal there?
Sorry, I don't mean to make light of the situation.
No, I'm sorry. His brother is 8 years old. But again,
so the I don't know. It's sort of. I'm spacing the point from
the influx of youth in revolutions, especially young college students. I believe, I truly and honestly believe that we need to be educating our youth, specifically college-age students, about the looming issues in our country more than we are. It seems like as if we're actually giving them a prescripted history and a prescripted idealism that doesn't really reflect
a corporate America approved education, a corporate America approved
absolutely.
curriculum, and a corporate America approved history, so that there's a corporate approved narrative.
Whereas you would assume that those things would be almost worse in theocratic and militaristic governments, that we would actually believe that they would be more oppressive of youth, but I think we're doing it the same here, and that's why our children are so apathetic. So what do you think? I'm not advocating that we preach revolution to our children, but certainly to make them question.
Okay, we're going to have to break it off there, wrap it up there. We'll come back and we'll do other shows, other days. And this is for tonight. Gene Hislop, David Stevenson, co-host, Mark Albertson.